Good afternoon, class. Upon further reflection, I determined after class today that rather than just leave you to define and familiarize yourself with the terms that were on the latter portion of our video guide for today's class, and they were also featured in your reading last night, I wanted to just touch upon these because they seem quite central to our understanding of the world region of Europe. I wanted to address them a bit more directly. So what follows is a lecturette where I will address that handful of terms and try to help put the historical experience of the world region of Europe, at least over the past 500 years, into a little bit greater perspective for us. So this is our purpose here, and I'll move on and we'll just address these terms one at a time. So first off, we have colonialism, and colonialism is a term and a pattern of behavior that really does focus quite directly upon Europe and its experience over the past 500 years. And it speaks specifically to the efforts that various European countries will undertake, really starting about 500 years ago, the 1400s or 1500 or so, whereby they lay claim to various regions of the world. And this colonial process is really important for helping to explain how Europe starts to come in contact with really a very wide-ranging portfolio of the world's regions, and it really brings Europe in contact. And trade had been going on for centuries, and even global trade had been going on for centuries prior to the year 1500. And a lot of that had to do with, essentially what a wise trader does is they venture to far or distant parts of the earth and find a product or resource that's relatively rare, and then they bring it to another part of the world where they can sell it for a high profit or a higher profit due to its relative rarity. The fact that you go to a place where something is common, you buy it cheaply, and then you take it back to a place where that good or product is more rare and you can sell it for a higher profit margin. This had been going on, but Europeans are going to take this to a whole new level, and in this race for prosperity and competitiveness, European countries are going to find themselves taking on colonial possessions throughout the world. This map here shows you how essentially different parts of the world different parts of Europe lay claim to vast portions of Earth's surface. And you'll notice that Europe is very active in this. Here we have the British possessions in northeastern North America. Of course, this would also be a part of that, but this map is trying to show the United States as a colonial player as well. We see French involvement in parts of Africa. This is in the year 1800. We have Spain and its vast possessions in the Western Hemisphere, Portugal with its relatively large portion of South America, and then also various pieces of Africa, and as I mentioned, India, even all the way out to the easternmost Spice Islands. So this is really important, but what happens as the colonial period moves forward is we're going to see that European powers try to control ever so forcefully not just these lands, but they're also going to control the production, the transport, and commerce and sale of these. So as this process gets going, Europe, of course, is going to become more and more involved in places that are further afield from the European world region. So colonialism is quite important here. Mercantilism refers to the various systems of trade. These countries, this is actually quite closely related to colonialism, but you'll see that various resources become valuable to the various countries of Europe. And what European countries are going to increasingly focus upon is not going to places like China to buy finished goods like porcelain or tea or jade or silk, or head to India for various spices like cinnamon or cardamom or things like that. Now the emphasis is going to be on, rather than looking for actual products, it's going to have a strong emphasis upon natural resources. And the mercantilist pattern of trade is also important. It's important to note that European countries will become increasingly competitive because once you've established a colony, and this shows better in the case of Great Britain, its colony of what was the British colonies in North America, which preceded our formation of the United States, of course. They're going to not only look for these resources, but they're going to do everything they can to make sure that there's no loss of profits from their given colony. So this is going to put various countries in Europe increasingly in competition with one another. We could use the term leakage. These European countries don't want to have any leakage take place, because what leakage essentially means is that you allow one of your national rivals, like say France or Spain, if they can conduct trade with part of your colonies, this is going to occur at the expense of your colonial economy. And this, of course, is not a wise or sustainable strategy, and at least it wasn't thought of that way back then. So they will do whatever they can to limit the opportunities that their colonial possessions will have for trade with other trade partners throughout the world. So you can see how this starts to lay some of the frustrations that our founding fathers and our ancestors had when they saw the British Crown place artificial restrictions on who colonial merchants could trade with. Because of course, if you're a trader, you want to be able to pit your various buyers off against one another. That doesn't work very well if the colonial policies say, no, you can only send your resources or products to your mother country. So mercantilism plays a powerful role. It's a pattern of trade, plays a powerful role in the early emergence of Europe. Okay, capitalism, most of you are probably familiar with this, although it's a term that's sort of prone to a little bit of confusion. Capitalism is an economic philosophy, and what it stresses is the role of individuals and their private property. If we want to think of capital in its simplest terms, capital is simply the money it takes to make money. And one of the aspects of genius of the capitalist system is that it allows individuals who may not have a whole lot of money or not enough money to start a full project of enterprise. When capitalism is paired with a joint stock corporation, it allows many people to pool their private resources that then allows an entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs the capital, the startup capital that they will need to start producing a product or setting up a system for extracting a resource. And then as a owner of this enterprise, so if you've invested some capital to help an entrepreneur act upon some clever idea, then you as a co-owner in that enterprise, a stockholder, you share in the profits of that effort. Capitalism has been a decisive force in the history of Europe's rise because it has allowed for the efficient and fast accumulation of capital and capital resources so that people can move forward with their enterprising ideas. And of course, if there's a clear criticism of capitalism, it's the fact that capitalism tends to know few boundaries. There's really you can't teach the capitalist system a definition of enough, because it's always competitive. You're always concerned about possible rivals who might improve upon your work. Just ask Apple or Samsung about the sort of lively competitive concerns that motivate companies like this. Capitalism is part of Europe's genius, and also it has created a number of problems for those parts of the world that have come in contact with European capitalism. Industrialization in the 18th century, as our documentary today started to suggest, industrialization really began in the mid-18th century in Great Britain. Started first with the textile industry, whereby innovative capitalists began the process of adapting essentially the skills of mass production. And so what we start to see happen in Great Britain in the 1700s is production now becomes essentially an automated process, and the small-time sort of craftsman gets replaced by the factory. And what this means for Great Britain is that it can produce its finished or manufactured goods with tremendously greater efficiency, and this efficiency allows it to produce goods much more cheaply. It can sell them more cheaply, but it can also sell them at a very high profit margin. And industrialization and capitalism go hat in hand, because the increasing profits that come from this early industrialization allow many British industries to reinvest their profits into still more innovative processes. By 1800, this industrialization process visits the mainland of Europe, and other countries like France and Germany will soon benefit from it as well. But in almost all cases, Europe begins to displace the production centers in other parts of the world, places like India, China, and it becomes a very powerful, efficient, prosperous region as a result. Imperialism is kind of like colonialism 2.0. Imperialism, which really breaks out during the 19th century. After several decades of industrialization, Europe begins to crave two things essentially. One, it needs more raw materials so that it can fuel its factories, which result in these high profits that the industrialization process brings forth. It also needs to sell its increasing productivity too. So in this case, in Africa, what we see is European countries just grabbing portions of the globe that they think they can conquer. Their industrial technology gives them an advantage for sure, and they start to, even without knowing for sure whether a region will help them build their economy, European countries just almost instinctively grab any vulnerable or eligible part of the world to become part of their imperial possessions. The United States wades into this process too. We claim some imperial possessions, such as, for a time, Cuba, but for sure Puerto Rico, Hawaii, parts of the Philippines, so on and so forth. Imperialism is a very powerful chapter for Europe, but it also raises all sorts of moral problems too, because the rights of people are seldom respected, and even though Europeans lay claim to these vast parts of the planet, they're not extending the political rights and privileges to the inhabitants of these far-flung regions. Anti-colonialism emerges with real force in the mid-20th century. Here we have a picture of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was instrumental in calling attention to the gross injustices of the British Empire, and he uses powerful symbolism of Indians, native heritage. You see here he's dressed in a simple dhoti, which is a cloth wrap around. Every day, you see a picture of him here, he would produce his own yarn to make cloth, which was of course a slap in the face. Indians had made their own cloth for centuries prior to the arrival of the Brits and their industrial textiles. So he, by the mid-20th century following World War II, was able to call attention to the gross excesses of much of what Europe was carrying out against the world. I'm going to stop there today, and I'll make brief mention of my remaining terms tomorrow.